Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. The Prime Minister finds himself having to defend his NATO record. On Thursday, a group of U.S. senators wrote to Justin Trudeau telling him they are profoundly disappointed and concerned that Canada will not meet its 2% of GDP NATO commitment even by the end of the decade. It's a failure the senators say will harm the alliance and the free world. Here's how the Prime Minister responded on Friday.
And I will say, in the conversations I've had with my American colleagues and counterparts, the massive investments we're making in upgrading our fighter jet fleet with 88 new fighter jets, our investments close to $40 billion in NORAD modernization, our recent budget's massive investments in Arctic safety and security, recognizing NATO's western and northern flank is Canada's Arctic, are all extremely well received by the Americans and by allies around the world who want to see us continue to step up. We recognize there's more to do, and we will be there to do it.
Well, to talk about this, we're now joined by Robert Fife, Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail, Stephanie Levitz, Deputy Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star, and Robert Russo, veteran Ottawa journalist who's now with The Economist. Hello to the three of you.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
So, you know, it's rare. It's rare for U.S. senators to write to the head of a foreign government and say what they said. How embarrassing is this for Trudeau and his government? How embarrassing is this for Canada?
Well, it's not embarrassing. It's a lot more serious than that. We have some very serious negotiations coming up in terms of the renegotiation of the free trade agreement. And these senators are saying you got to put something on the table, and it's going to have to be something to do with defense. So it is a very serious issue. We've been getting away as being freeloaders for a long time, but the Americans, and you know, it's a very polarized society, but you've got Democrats and you've got Republicans that are on side that Canada and our other allies have to put a lot more money on the table, and we are seeing that our NATO allies are in some cases spending up to 3%, even though there's a 2% target, and we're at 1.7%, and even what we committed to is not committed to spending. That's just sort of kind of vague promises of doing something. So it's going to be a very embarrassing moment for the Prime Minister in Washington when the NATO leaders meet if he cannot put something more on the table. And I think there are going to be real consequences for this country unless we can really pony up to the bar and put real money and real commitments that we're going to do something.
Yeah, and two important points that you raised there. One, the fact that this was a bipartisan letter, both Democrats and Republicans, and two, there is this NATO meeting in Washington come July. Stephanie, what do you make of it?
Well, doesn't this just put the pin in the argument trying to be advanced by Trudeau and his cabinet that they're down in the U.S. right now making good relations and getting ready for the next Trump administration? Because clearly whatever it is they're talking to their American counterparts, they're not listening, because what the Americans want to hear is defense spending, please. And so it's a bit embarrassing for the Trudeau government, I think, in that context, because they did make this very big show of we're not going to, get sleepwalked into a next Trump administration if there is one, and it sort of, again, puts the point, if we can say this, to about Justin Trudeau's longer-term commitment to defense, and should raise a question domestically right away to the Conservatives, okay, what is your plan then? Because if, it could in fact be a Conservative government that is left dealing with the Trump administration, more demands on defense, and we still don't have clarity from the Tories about how they would even approach this really difficult issue.
Yeah, and underline the fact that it was Trump in his presidency that threw NATO up in the air, saying, the United States can't be flipping the bill for everything. Rob, what do you say?
It is, I think we should be abashed by this. It isn't just the Americans. I think we've all been to briefings where some of our European allies who are closer to what's going on in Ukraine than we are saying they're doing far, far more than 2%. They're looking at 5%. They're also looking at a more robust and a more rambunctious Russia that is casting its glance beyond Ukraine as well. We shouldn't be surprised. I mean, if you go back to John Manley said that we have the reputation of the people who, when the bill comes, we get up and we excuse ourselves to go to the washroom and wash our hands. Well, we're not doing that. Our allies are now saying, not only are you getting up and going to the washroom, you're going out the back, you're getting into the getaway car, which is running, and getting out of here as soon as you can. This is something, the call is coming from beyond the United States. It's coming from our other allies. But the other truth is, it's not a vote winner. it just doesn't seem to make a difference with Canadian voters. When political parties, like even the NDP tried this in 2008, they tried to have a more robust military platform. They found that they lost votes with it. Until we're actually threatened, it seems that chagrin and embarrassment doesn't seem to make this a vote getter. That changes if China and Russia become more expansionist than they're threatening to be now. But as it stands now, a lot of the people who run campaigns don't believe it's a vote getter.
Yeah, I would agree with you earlier. But the world's changed since then. And the Canadian, for a long period of time, Liberals, whether it was Jean Chrétien or Trudeau, was saying, look, Canadians don't really care about defense spending, so we're not going to spend a lot of money. If we have to cut, we'll always cut the defense budget. But the fact that Russia has invaded Ukraine and is threatening Eastern Europe, and you have Germany, which all of a sudden has turned around and has spent billions and billions of dollars to rearm. All of France, all of these countries have done so. So has Japan because of the fear about Chinese expansionism. The world has changed, and that's why you're seeing all these NATO countries spending a lot of money now, and that's why the Americans are saying, hey, we're not going to foot all this stuff, and you better do something as well. And we better think about this. In the Arctic, where they want us to spend a lot more money than we've even committed to do, Russia has very sophisticated military bases up there, and we simply want to rely on F-35s or for the Americans in Alaska. No, that's not going to cut it anymore, particularly because China's now building nuclear icebreakers to come into there. So the world has changed, and I think Canadians are not stupid, and they understand that we have to. And we have a very proud tradition, by the way, a military tradition. When tough gets going, Canada's always there. And I think Canadians, my view is that Canadians will accept more defense spending because it's the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, and to that, it's interesting that you raise Alaska, because it makes me think of General Andrew Leslie's, retired General Andrew Leslie's letter or interview with the National Post, because here he is, a former member of the Trudeau cabinet, essentially saying that Justin Trudeau does not care about defense, or is at least not serious enough about defense. How does that affect the Prime Minister? Do you think, does it move him in any way, Stephanie, when there's a debate as to whether or not Canadians really care about investing in it?
Well, I mean, that presumes that Justin Trudeau ever cared about defense. I mean, in the entirety of his political career, it's not as though at one point in time he really cared and then stopped caring. It's not that he never cared and then he did. He doesn't evidence any care. And I think to Bob's point and a little bit to Rob's, Canadians, will care about the things that matter to them, obviously, but strong leadership means explaining to them and taking them along and saying, here is why this matters. And what is wrong with trying to drive Canadians to care about the military? What is wrong with saying to them, for example, hey, did you know that the armed forces can really provide your kid an education, and they can go to school, and then we could get your kid into the military, and then they'd have all these skills? I'm not saying that we should go to the American-style military culture. That is a different thing. It's a different economy. But Canadians will care if their leaders can show them the reason to care. If their leaders themselves don't care, that's what Canadians pick up on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, listen, I'm going to quickly move on, because before we're done, I also want to talk about the most recent Abacus poll. But I'm jumping in part because you talk about leadership. And yes, the Abacus poll shows us the Conservatives still have a massive lead over Liberals. But what was interesting to me were the impressions and traits that Canadians have of the two leaders. Because when it comes to things like hiding their true values in order to get elected, kindness, and being too extreme, Canadians kind of give, if we have, and I believe we have the board here, Canadians give both Pierre Poilievre and Justin Trudeau equal marks. They are impressed, not impressed on equal levels on both of them. So what does that mean for the political parties as they try to set up into another campaign, do you think, Bob?
It just shows that Canadians are actually pretty smart, because they're seeing Trudeau, who's always practicing wedge politics consistently. But you also have Pierre Poilievre, who occasionally get these moments where he's kind of a nice guy and he's got a sense of humor, but then he quickly retreats back to the guy that we all know, which is kind of a nasty, mean guy. And, you watch Question Period and you see both of these people going at each other. You're a white supremacist, you're anti-abortionist, you're worse than me. You're worse than me, yeah. And all of that sort of stuff. And it it's kind of depressing, to be frankly. Even all of us watching this stuff, can you not move on from this? So I just think the Canadians are bang on. They see it. I don't know what the end result is going to be. It's one of the things that I think that if Trudeau does leave and there's another, and the Liberals get another leader, that could be a game changer electorally, because I don't think people, they're fed up with Trudeau. They park in their votes with the Conservatives, but I'm not certain that Mr. Poilievre is a shoo-in if there's a new Liberal leader who can be positive.
Yeah, well, I think when you looked at the numbers, it looks like no Canadians really sold on either one very strongly. Although, for me, what tweaked in my mind was if the Liberal campaign is going to be setting up as, Poilievre is someone you can't trust, it's not as if Canadians to look at Trudeau and say, oh, you're someone we can trust. What do you make of the numbers and the impact of it?
To Bob's point, one of the things we can make of the numbers is that some of the social programs that the Liberals have rolled out as part of their economic and social vision are things Canadians like. And the concern that Pierre Poilievre would do away with them is that maybe that sweet spot where if the Liberals did have a new leader, that could be the thing that shifts, because that new leader can say, hey, I'm going to protect your national daycare program. I'm going to protect your dental program. And it also means the pressure, not unlike the conversation we were just having with the military, the pressure is going to be on Mr. Poilievre to explain and justify why he's going to do away with some of these programs and how he will untangle them. That's that's a lot harder to do, untangling a big national daycare program. That's hard to cut off at the knees without some kind of political repercussion.
A couple of things jumped out at me in the poll. Number one is time for a change versus re-elect the Liberals, and it was 54% for time for a change. Re-elect the Liberals was 17%. That tells me that no matter what Justin Trudeau might say about Pierre Poilievre, people have tuned him out. People don't want to hear it from him. They might want to hear it from somebody else, but they don't want to hear it from him. So scare tactics are going to be very, very difficult to convince voters to pay attention to those. The other thing that Mr. Poilievre needs to worry about is, as Stephanie said, he's rebuilt the Conservative Party. The people who have signed up to support the Conservative Party and who are supporting them in polls now go beyond the base of his party. They're interested in social programs. Is he prepared to alienate those people, and can he afford to do so and maintain the lofty numbers that he has now? As Bob was saying, I'm not sure that he can, because while people have turned away from Mr. Trudeau, they haven't decided that Mr. Poilievre is the guy that they want to put their faith in. They know that they want to change, but I wouldn't call Mr. Poilievre a beloved figure. But maybe the Conservatives are banking on time for change, that number there, which is going to be a very, very difficult sentiment to try and change around a decade in. There's a diminishing power a prime minister has the longer he's in office. And Stephen Harper found this out in 2015. You can promise things and people just stop believing you, and it's beginning to look like they're either tuned out Mr. Trudeau or they stop believing him.
Mm-hmm. Well, we continue to watch. Always appreciate our time together. Bob, Stephanie, Rob, thank you for that.
My pleasure.